When I was 15, my older brother Daniel disappeared during a ghost tour at the St. Augustine Lighthouse. That place was always a magnet for weirdos and thrill seekers, especially around Halloween, and Daniel was exactly the type to lean into it. He was 17, the kind of guy who'd pull pranks on strangers and sneak off just to scare me. At first, everyone thought it was just another one of his jokes. But then hours passed. The park staff searched the grounds. Police came. Dogs were brought in. Nothing. No signs of struggle, no clues, no body. One minute, he was at the top of the tower, joking around with a group. The next, he was just gone. My family was never the same after that. My mom became obsessed with true crime forums, convinced some lunatic had taken him. My dad drank more. Eventually, they split, and I spent the next 10 years avoiding that lighthouse at all costs. I couldn't even look at pictures of it. That stupid spiral staircase haunted my dreams. But deep down, I never stopped wondering what really happened to Daniel. And part of me always believed, knew he never left that tower. Last month, I got a phone call from a number I hadn't seen in over a decade. Daniel's number. I froze when I saw it. I was in my apartment in Tampa, working late on a freelance editing gig, when my phone lit up. It was almost midnight. For a second, I thought it was a mistake. Or maybe some scammer had reused his number. But something in me just knew. I answered. There was static. Heavy, wavering static like a stormy radio. And beneath it, a voice. Very faint. It barely sounded human, hoarse, slow, but I recognized it. Evan, it said. My name. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My heart felt like it had stopped. Down here. Then the call dropped. I stared at the screen until it went dark. I tried calling back, but it didn't even ring. Just a dead line. I checked the number again. Still his. Still the same last 4 digits I'd memorized when I was a kid. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The next morning, I packed a bag, got in my car, and drove across the state to St. Augustine. I told no one. The town was just as I remembered, sleepy, haunted, beautiful in a way that made your skin crawl. The lighthouse looked smaller than I remembered, but still carried that strange weight. It sat at the edge of the trees like it was waiting for something. I bought a ticket for the last tour of the day. The woman at the front desk smiled too easily and handed me a laminated pamphlet. I nodded along as the guide did her routine about the history, the shipwrecks, the ghost sightings. I let the group wander, and when they turned to go back down, I stayed behind. I told the guide I just wanted a minute to look out over the coast. She nodded, not really caring, and followed the group. I was alone. The sun was setting behind the trees. Shadows stretched long across the ground. I took a deep breath and looked around. The lighthouse was quiet. Too quiet. No wind. No creaking. Just the faint hum of air and time. Then I heard it. 3 short knocks. Not from above. From beneath me. I dropped to my knees and pressed my ear to the metal grate in the floor, the one I'd always assumed was part of the ventilation system. Something was moving down there. Something. Shifting. Breathing. I backed away and found a flashlight in my bag. There was a metal hatch next to the stairwell, half hidden behind an old supply shelf. The latch was rusted, but it gave with some pressure. The door opened, revealing a narrow stone shaft with an old ladder that disappeared into the dark. I knew I shouldn't have gone down there, but I also knew, without any doubt, that this was where Daniel had gone. This was where the call came from. The air got colder as I climbed. The metal rungs were slick with condensation, and the stone walls felt wrong, too smooth, like they'd been polished. After about 30 feet, the tunnel opened into a small chamber. My flashlight flickered, but stayed on. The room was maybe 10 feet across. Brick walls, damp floor, and in the far corner, a pile of something. Blankets? No. Clothes. Old, tattered clothes. Some looked modern. Some didn't. There were dozens of them. Jackets, shoes, even a backpack covered in mold. And then I saw the phone. Daniel's old flip phone. The exact one he'd had in 2014. It was lying in the dirt, screen cracked, but powered on faint blue light still glowing. I picked it up. It was warm. Suddenly, I heard a sound behind me. A slow scrape. I turned and pointed the flashlight. A figure was standing in the tunnel. At first, I thought it was a person. A man, maybe. But the shape was wrong. Too thin. Too still. Like it had forgotten how to move like a person should. Its arms hung low, fingers curled. And its face, its face, was pale, almost stretched. Hollow eyes that glowed faintly in the light. But then it spoke. Evan. It wasn't my brother's voice anymore. It was the voice from the call, yes, but it sounded broken now, almost mocking. Like something had tried to become Daniel, but hadn't gotten it quite right. I dropped the phone and bolted. I don't remember climbing back up. Just flashes, cold rungs, my hands slipping, that thing's breath on my neck. I burst through the hatch and slammed it shut behind me, dragging the shelf back over it with shaking arms. The tour guide found me outside, pale and covered in dirt. I told her I'd gotten sick from the stairs and just needed air. She didn't press. I drove straight home and blocked the number. But 2 nights ago, I got another call. Same number. This time, I didn't answer, but it left a voicemail. No words, just breathing, slow and steady, and underneath it, like it was being played backward, I swear I heard my name. The police say the number doesn't exist anymore, that it was disconnected years ago. But last night, I opened my phone and saw a new photo in my gallery. It was a picture of the lighthouse basement, the chamber I stood in. Only in this photo, I wasn't alone. Something was standing behind me, inches from my back, smiling. I worked at the Florida Theater in Jacksonville during my sophomore year of college. I was a part-time concessions guy, mostly, but sometimes I'd help out with closing duties or cleanup in the auditorium. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a cool enough gig. The building was old, kind of beautiful in that vintage, falling apart kind of way. Most nights were uneventful. Slow crowd, older folks, the occasional school group. But every Friday, like clockwork, there was him. The man. I don't know his name. No one did. He wasn't listed in any of the season pass holders, and he never picked up tickets online. He just walked up to the box office about 10 minutes before the last show of the night, paid in cash, and went inside. Always the same seat, row L, seat 7. I remember because it was dead center in that row. Not too close to the screen, but not too far. Just enough to disappear into the middle of the crowd without drawing attention. Except he did draw attention, at least from us. He never brought food or drinks. He never spoke. Not to staff, not to the ushers, not even to other guests. He wore the same thing every time, gray slacks, a long coat, and a faded ball cap pulled low over his eyes. I started calling him Friday Man. Real creative, I know. But the guy had this presence. Like he knew everyone was aware of him, but just didn't care. One Friday night after close, I made a dumb joke to my coworker Jamie about how Friday Man might live in the theater, like some kind of cryptid. She laughed, but it didn't feel that funny. Something about him always unsettled me. And it wasn't just that he was quiet, it was the way he moved. Like he didn't have anywhere to be after. No phone to check, no ride waiting. He just existed in the building and then disappeared. One night, about an hour after the last show ended, I stayed late to help Jamie fix a popcorn machine issue. The theater was dark except for a few overhead lights. Everyone else had cleared out. I went to take the trash out through the back hallway near the old maintenance area, an area guests weren't allowed, and that's when I saw him. Friday Man. He wasn't heading toward the exit. He was walking toward the far end of the corridor, the side of the building that hadn't been renovated. He stopped at a rusted metal door I'd never noticed before, pulled out a key from his coat, and let himself in like he'd done it 100 times. The door shut behind him, completely silent. I stood there frozen with a bag of trash in my hands. Then I made the dumbest decision of my life. I waited. 10 minutes. 20. Nothing. Finally, I crept over, gently turned the knob. Locked. The next day, I came back early, way before opening, and asked the facilities guy, Tom, about that hallway door. He raised an eyebrow. What door? I described it. Far hallway, right side, rusted metal. He shook his head. Only thing down there is old boiler lines and some busted storage. You sure you didn't imagine it? We bricked that section off years ago. I didn't argue. I knew what I saw. Over the next few weeks, I started paying closer attention. Friday Man was always there, always on time, always left after the show ended, or so it seemed. But I never saw him actually exit. He'd vanish between the end credits and the cleaning crew. Just gone. So I made a plan. One night, after the final showing, I pretended to leave with everyone else, but doubled back through the alley and re-entered through a side emergency door I'd unlocked earlier. I crept in, silent, staying low. The theater was dark except for the glow of the emergency lights and the last flickers of credits on the screen. Row L was empty. Or at least, I thought it was, until I saw him get up, slowly, and head toward the same hallway. I followed at a distance. He walked to the same door. unlocked it, slipped inside. This time, I was closer, and before it shut, I caught it, a sliver of light and what looked like a hallway behind it. Clean. Lived in. After he disappeared inside, I rushed up. The door was still warm. I pressed my ear to it. Silence. I didn't try the handle again. Not yet. I left. I needed to think. 2 days later, on my day off, I came back with a camera. Not a phone, a real camera with low light capability. I waited until closing, snuck in again, and found the door. This time, it wasn't locked. I slipped inside. There was a hallway, narrow, concrete, dimly lit by a single hanging bulb. Along the left wall were what looked like utility panels, and to the right were rooms. Small ones. No numbers, just plywood doors, slightly ajar. Inside one, I found a cot. In another, shelves stacked with neatly folded clothes, canned food, bottled water. And in the last one, a desk. On the desk were photographs. Dozens of them. Photos of employees. Jamie laughing in the concession stand. Me talking to a customer. Others, ushers, cleaners, even the manager. All taken from inside the building. All from different angles. Some through windows. Some from what looked like ceiling vents. All time-stamped. Some were printed on photo paper. Others were just raw film strips drying on a string across the room. But the worst part? There was a wall covered in sketches. Not drawings, diagrams. The floor plan of the theater. Dotted lines leading from seat L7 to several back hallways. Arrows marking paths. Circles around bathrooms, dressing rooms, staff break areas. It looked like hunting patterns. I heard footsteps. I didn't wait. I bolted out of there, slammed the door behind me, and reported it straight to the cops. By the time they checked, the room was cleared out. Empty. Like it had never been used. No photos. No food. Just dust and old plumbing. They said it was probably a squatter. Someone who slipped in and out over the years. They couldn't find him. No ID. No trace. Friday man never came back after that. But last week, Jamie called me. She's working at a new venue now. Said a guy came to one of her shows. Quiet. Paid in cash. Sat center row. And when she looked closer, she swore he was wearing the same coat. I was 23 when I got the job at public school number 4 in Jacksonville, Florida. It was 1967, and I had just finished my nursing program, fresh out of school and desperate for work. I'd applied to hospitals, clinics, even private homes, but it was a tough time for young women trying to break into the field. So when the Duval County School Board offered me a full-time nurse position at one of the city's older schools, I jumped on it. It didn't bother me at first that the school was falling apart. I grew up in old buildings. The place had history, big iron-framed windows, tall ceilings, hardwood floors worn soft with time. But from the moment I stepped inside, something felt off. It was too quiet, even with kids in the halls. The kind of silence that sat under everything, like a tension you couldn't name. I brushed it off. I was lucky to have a job, and for the first few weeks, things were mostly normal. Kids came in with the usual problems, scraped knees, fevers, anxiety about tests. A few kids tried faking sick to go home early. It was routine, predictable. But then, about a month in, I started noticing a pattern. Certain boys, never girls, between the ages of 7 and 10 would get pulled from class in the middle of the day. It always happened without much fuss. Someone from the front office would knock on the classroom door, murmur something to the teacher, and off the boy would go, no explanation. The teachers never seemed surprised. When I asked about it, I got vague answers. Health screenings, they'd say. Part of a district program. Nothing to worry about. That made no sense. I was the only licensed medical staff in the entire building, and no one had told me anything about health screenings. The boys would come back an hour or so later, walking slower, eyes glazed. And sometimes they had bandages. Not the kind you slap on a paper-cut proper gauze wraps. Clean, tight, always in the same places. Upper arms, shoulders, upper back. Always covered by their uniform shirts. I started keeping notes. One boy, Thomas, came to me after his screening. He didn't speak, just sat down and held out his arm. His eyes were wide, but there was no fear in them, just emptiness. I peeled the gauze back, careful not to hurt him, and what I saw made me cold. There was a stitch line, small, tight, precise. A clean surgical incision about 3 inches long. Not the kind of injury a child gets falling off a swing. It was deliberate. I asked him where he got it. He didn't answer, just shook his head. The next morning, Mr. Kincaid, the principal, called me into his office. He was polite, smiling too much. Offered me tea I didn't touch. Then he slid a file folder across the desk toward me. Just a bit of formality, he said. The district requires it for certain positions now. Nothing unusual. It was an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, thick with legal jargon. I read enough to get the message. Anything I saw, heard, or suspected on school grounds was confidential, including student injuries, including everything. I wanted to refuse. I almost did, but I was behind on rent. My car was barely holding together, and he made it clear that declining would impact my employment. So I signed. But after that, I watched more carefully. I started noticing that the boys selected for these screenings all had things in common. Most came from low-income families. Some lived with relatives, some in group homes. A few had disciplinary records. They were kids who'd fall through the cracks, the ones no one would fight for if they went missing. I also started noticing a man. Not faculty, I never saw him in staff meetings. He wore a gray suit and carried a worn leather briefcase. He came only on certain days, always left through the side stairwell leading to the basement. One Friday, I stayed late to catch up on reports. The building was nearly empty when I heard footsteps in the hallway. I looked through my office window and saw Mr. Kincaid and that same man walking a boy down the corridor toward that locked stairwell. I waited, heart thudding, until they were out of sight, then followed. The metal door was slightly ajar. I slipped inside, careful not to make a sound. The stairs were narrow and steep, descending into dark concrete. I crept down just far enough to hear them. Voices, footsteps, then a metal cart squeaking. I followed slowly until I found a narrow crack in one of the basement doors. Through it, I saw a room lit by a single bulb. The boy sat shirtless on a table. The man in the suit was now in a lab coat, bending over him with gloves and a small scalpel. He was stitching something just below the boy's shoulder. The boy wasn't restrained. He wasn't crying. He just stared at the ceiling. On a table beside them was a tray of instruments and a small metal tag, like a flattened dog tag, no engraving. The man slipped it into a pouch. He looked calm, precise. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I turned and climbed back up the stairs, knees shaking. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that boy's face, about the scar on Thomas's arm. I didn't know what they were doing, but it was organized, systematic. The next Monday, Mr. Kincaid called me in again. He didn't ask any questions, didn't explain, just handed me a sealed envelope and said, "It's time for you to move on." Inside was a check, more than I made in a year. I asked if I was being let go. He just smiled. "We're restructuring." I packed my things that afternoon. I never worked in a school again. Years later, I tried to come forward. I contacted local journalists, even spoke to a lawyer, but the NDA was still active, and no one wanted to publish something without hard evidence. My copies of the notes had gone missing from storage. The envelope with the gauze sample gone. I told myself it was over, that maybe they stopped, but I never really believed it. Now the place is called the Devil's School. People break in and talk about ghosts, strange sounds, unexplained shadows. They film TikToks and talk about how haunted it is, but they're not seeing the real horror. They're looking for spirits when they should be asking what happened in the walls, and who made sure no one ever found out. I've been in demolition and restoration work for almost 15 years. South Florida is full of weird old buildings, so you see your fair share of odd things. Walled-off rooms, half-finished stairwells, vaults where no vault should be. But the Biltmore Hotel job was different. Not flashy different, quiet different. The kind of strange that settles in your stomach before your brain catches up. It was supposed to be just another luxury hotel renovation. Reopen some floors, modernize the suites, preserve the old charm. We were contracted to demo the upper stories that hadn't been touched since the late 80s. The pay was better than average, but the paperwork was thick. NDAs, restricted access floor plans, a lot of don't touch this clauses. Still, money talks. On our third day, we got assigned to the northeast wing of the 13th floor. Most hotels don't have a 13th floor listed. This one did, and it looked like it hadn't been walked through in decades. The hallway was different from the rest. Dimmer, narrower. The wallpaper was an older design than any other part of the building, heavy floral patterns, faded and peeling. There were old sconces along the wall that hadn't been electrified in who knows how long. And at the very end of the hall, there was something that didn't belong. A brick wall. Fresh, at least compared to everything else. Probably added in the last 40 years. Why would you brick off a hallway? Jorge, one of the guys on the crew, muttered. Why not just put up drywall? He had a point. As we started to peel back the framework and insulation surrounding it, we noticed something else. Small, irregular holes in the brick. Not clean punches like someone had drilled through. They were scattered and shallow, like something had slammed into the surface. Bullet holes, another guy said. He was half joking. At least, we thought he was. The site manager told us to skip that section, said it wasn't part of the approved blueprint, and that our focus was elsewhere. But of course, curiosity wins out when you're standing in front of a sealed door on the 13th floor of a hotel with a century of shady history. So we went back that night. Just me, Jorge, and a flashlight. The brick wasn't anchored well. Jorge had a pry bar and chipped through the mortar like it was chalk. Took us less than an hour to clear the opening. Behind it was a door. Heavy wood, reinforced with steel at the hinges. No knob. Just a keyhole and a dead latch that had rusted shut. There was no number on the door, just an impression in the wood where a plaque used to be. We forced it open. The smell hit first, old, stale rot, like mildew and rust had been arguing for control of the space for 50 years. The room behind it was untouched, preserved like a wasp in amber. Dust blanketed everything in a thick gray coat. The wallpaper inside matched the hallway, red and gold, but heavily water-damaged. The room had a high window, painted shut, and a single overhead light bulb, dim but still functional. We flipped the switch. It buzzed and flickered. There was a bed in the far corner. Old iron frame. The mattress had a massive reddish-brown stain that had seeped through to the floor. Next to the bed was a nightstand with a cloudy drinking glass and a yellowed book, The American Gunman, copyright 1934. Near the closet sat a single suitcase. It was tan leather, worn at the edges, and had no tags or locks. Just old brass buckles. I don't know why I didn't want to open it. Maybe because everything else in the room looked left behind. Like someone packed, sat down, and never made it out. But Jorge was already on it. He flipped it open. Inside were two neat stacks of black and white photographs. Each one was a portrait. Men and women, mostly young. All taken indoors, against simple backdrops. Almost like passport photos, but more personal. More intimate. None of them had names. But on the back of each one was a number. No dates. Just numbers, handwritten in tight cursive, like a log. Underneath the photos was a small revolver. Rusted. Loaded. One bullet was missing. I'll be honest, I wanted to leave right then. But Jorge was fascinated. He flipped through every photo like he was trying to recognize someone. His hands were shaking. You ever notice, he said, that none of these people are smiling? That's when we heard the voice on the radio. Our walkie-talkies, left on the nightstand, crackled. We hadn't heard them all night. Then came a man's voice, low and staticky. Who's in 1373? Neither of us said anything. We just stared at each other. The number hit me wrong. There was no room 1373 on the floor plan. The Biltmore doesn't go that high. And besides, that door didn't have a number. But Jorge got pale, like he knew something I didn't. We left the room fast, resealed the bricks the best we could, and didn't talk on the way out. Next morning, our site manager said the project's focus had shifted. We were reassigned to the ballroom. No mention of the 13th floor. No questions. 2 days later, Jorge stopped showing up. No call. No word. I tried texting him. Nothing. So I called his emergency contact, his cousin. She said Jorge had gone back to Cuba the night after our little discovery. Didn't tell anyone. Just vanished. I still had one of the photos. Slipped it into my pocket before we sealed the wall. Last week, I took it to a friend who works in public records. We ran facial recognition software. Took a while, but eventually something pinged. A girl named Lillian Moore. Reported missing in 1936. Never found. The last witness statement said she was last seen walking into the Biltmore lobby with a man in a gray suit. The next day, I got a call from an unknown number. I didn't answer, but the voicemail was there. It was just breathing, then a faint voice, almost a whisper. Room 1373 is still occupied. And now, when I walk past the hotel on my way to other jobs, I can't help but look up. Because sometimes, just sometimes, I swear I see a flicker of light behind a high, bricked-up window. The same window that shouldn't exist. I work part-time at the Casadaga Spiritualist Camp, out near the cemetery where the so-called Devil's Chair sits. My job's nothing glamorous, mostly cleanup, maintenance, locking the chapel and visitor center at night. Sometimes I run minor tours when the regular guides are out. Casadaga's a quiet place with a strange reputation, mediums, psychics, odd rituals, but for the most part, it's just sleepy. Weird, but sleepy. I've lived nearby my whole life. Grew up around here. I know the roads by heart, the cracked sidewalks, the overgrown paths behind the gravestones. I know where the local teens sneak off to drink. I know which guests are real believers and which ones just want ghost stories for their Instagram. I've worked here long enough to know most of the stories are nonsense. Most. One spot, though, always gave me a weird feeling. They call it the Devil's Chair. It's this old brick and cement grave monument shaped like a throne. Legend says if you sit in it at midnight, the devil will speak to you, offer you things. There's another version where he shows you your worst memory. Some say if you leave a cold beer, it'll be empty by morning. I've cleaned up those beers more times than I can count. Sometimes they're unopened, sometimes half gone. I always figured it was squirrels or bored teenagers. Until a few months ago, when she started showing up. A woman, maybe early 40s, plain clothes, no makeup, hair always pulled back in a tight, severe bun. She'd come every single evening just before sunset. No car, no conversation. She never came for readings or asked for directions. She'd just walk straight through the camp, past the chapel, down the gravel path that cuts through the old cemetery, and sit in the Devil's Chair. Every single night. She'd sit there perfectly still, facing the same headstone, and whisper. Not fast or frantic, calm. Like she was catching up with an old friend. At first, I didn't pay much attention. We get all kinds in Casadaga, people grieving, looking for signs, stuck in some cycle of loss or guilt. I figured maybe she lost someone and the chair gave her comfort. But then I noticed the way she whispered. She'd pause, wait, then whisper again, like she was listening, like someone or something was answering her. It started bothering me. I'd be sweeping up the porch at the chapel and catch myself watching her through the trees. One night, I stayed later than usual, locking up the storage shed near the back fence, and I saw her still sitting there, nearly an hour after dark. No flashlight, no bug spray, just sitting there like the cold didn't touch her. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. One evening, I waited until she'd been there about 30 minutes. The sun had just dipped below the tree line, and the camp was mostly empty. I walked the gravel path slowly, hands in my jacket, pretending to be doing one last round. She didn't look at me when I got close, just kept her eyes on the headstone and murmured something under her breath. "Ma'am," I said, gently. "The grounds close at dusk. Are you okay?" She didn't react at first. Then, without turning, she said quietly, "He remembers you." I blinked. "Sorry." Now she turned, slow and smooth, like she'd been expecting me all along. Her face was pale in the fading light. Tired, but her eyes were sharp, alert, like she could see straight through me. "You were 12, she said. "You buried it behind the mausoleum. You thought no one saw." For a second, I couldn't breathe. I hadn't thought about that in over 20 years. Not since I was a kid running around this place with stupid dares and bigger lies. Not since that summer afternoon when something went horribly wrong. I swallowed. "I think you've got me mixed up with someone else." She smiled, not cruelly, just knowingly. "He saw," she said. "He's been waiting." That was all she said before standing up, brushing off her skirt, and walking past me. Not hurried, not scared, just calm. She didn't look back once. I didn't follow her. I couldn't move. The next morning, I walked straight to the tree behind the old mausoleum, the one with the thick roots that always seemed to grow in the shape of a hand. I hadn't been back there in years. It still looked the same. I crouched down near the base and pushed away a layer of leaves. The dirt underneath was soft, fresher than it should have been. I dug with my hands until I hit something hard. It was plastic, faded blue, a toy truck, cracked, just like I remembered. I kept digging and found a red shoelace, a scrap of denim. All things I had convinced myself weren't real. Things I told myself I imagined. But they were there, still buried. That night, the woman didn't come, nor the next night. But on the third evening, I found something waiting on the Devil's Chair, a single piece of paper folded in half, held down by a small stone. There was no one else on the grounds. The gates had been locked for hours. I unfolded the note. Inside, in clean, looping handwriting, it said, "He remembers. Do you?" That night, I didn't sleep. The next morning, I opened the staff shed and found a second note taped to the inside of the door. Same handwriting. We don't forget what was taken. I never told anyone at the camp. But the next week, a reporter came through asking about local legends. She mentioned the Devil's Chair, and before I could stop myself, I asked if she'd ever heard of a missing kid from the late 90s, a little boy who vanished near the cemetery. She paused, said yes, said he was never found. No leads. His name was Caleb, and the last place anyone saw him was at a summer gathering behind the chapel, playing near the mausoleum. I excused myself and threw up in the staff bathroom. I keep my distance from the chair now. I don't clean near it, don't touch the offerings, and I don't ask questions when I see someone whispering to it. But last night, someone left a new photo taped to the gate. It was me, at 12 years old, standing by the tree, smiling.